Okay. So I wanted to start off by saying thank you to everybody who has joined us here today. So my name is Tanya Boyd. I am the Director of Creative Collaboration with Project Success Academy in Corbo Tech. And it is my honor to present my friend, Iwona Wilson, today, who's going to tell us a lot about how opportunity framing and planning on the front end is so important. So thank you for being here, Iwona.
Okay, so I can start, Tanya. Yeah, all good?
Yes, all good.
Oh, okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for finding the time during your busy day to join our session. And welcome to our webinar, Think Slow, Act Fast. What is Opportunity Framing Workshop? My name is Iwona Wilson. You can see that on my tag. I just want to share how grateful I am for you, and it's what a pleasure to be with you in this room. So before we jump in, I'm gonna show you a couple of slides. But before we jump in, let's find out who is in the room. If you have access, if you have opportunity, jump into the chat and share where you're joining us from and what's the industry that you serve. I believe as a project manager, what's the industry that you serve most of the time? Okay, so we don't have any responses, but I understand that you must be busy with your schedule. So anyway, whatever you're at, really welcome. So the title of this session, Think Slow and Act Fast, is actually very, very intentional. And it's what Tanya mentioned earlier, what we're going to do today. We're going to pause to really find out how fast we can go later on. And what's the benefit? What are some of the tools that we can use to pause consciously in order to move faster later on? And before we move any further, before we move into what might be broken in project management, let me say this. What if projects felt different? What if we could take any idea we have on our mind and bring this to life with clarity, alignment, and value at the end? What if at the start of every project, the problem is crystal clear? The solution is defined. Success is measurable and agreed. Risks are visible. What if we have assumptions identified, named, and tested? What if stakeholders were aligned all the way from the start? What if governance was actually helpful? The question for you is, what would that change for you as the project manager? What change would you have if you would start project with clarity? Type in a chat. Hello, Robert from Fulham, London. Tanya, what would that change? Most of the time when I talk to different project managers, and I asked them that question, what if we could start with more power? What if we could generate clarity at the start? Maybe that's the opportunity where we could make project management profession more strategic. You with me? And this is really what we're going to be talking about today, a different way of thinking at the start. So my intention for today is that by the end of this session, you will find an opportunity for yourself, a new insight that would really give you an idea how to start project better. An opportunity framing as well as decision gate process, let them be your leverage so that you can strengthen not just your governance, but your decision making capabilities. And for those of you who are interested, there will be plenty of resources that I'll share with you at the end. And if you are some of those persons following me on LinkedIn, you know that today is also a launch of my book I wrote with my husband, Where Projects Are Won or Lost. And there will be an opportunity to purchase at very, very low price. So before we go any further, I'm just checking. the chat box as we go. So before we go any further, let me share why this work matters to me. I'm not a project manager. And before I was a consultant or strategist, I was a quality assurance engineer. And I started in the UK working in the oil and gas company for one of the major EPC contractor. So my work was very simple. I work on complex projects in development and execution phase, and my job was to set up project management system and to audit projects against the company procedures as well as the contracts. And those projects, like many others, especially in execution, would experience many challenges. And like those projects, like many others that you might be familiar, would fail or even got cancelled. And for someone working as a QA for a contractor, I never really knew why that happens. And after a while, I began asking big questions. Why technically capable teams that follow procedures would still cancel the project? Why are we doing everything right and we are still failing? And I knew there was something missing, maybe in my consciousness or in the way I understand projects. And as a 28-year-old QA engineer at that time, I felt like I want to make a bigger impact. So I quit my job and I accepted role for one of the largest oil and gas producer, and I moved to Australia. And in my first week, I was sitting in something they called opportunity framing workshop. And I saw how decision makers, functional managers, project teams would come together to explore the context, build the landscape, and have a real understanding what is the value proposition of the opportunity, what are some of the options. And in a very short space of time, they would create not just clarity around the project, but they would build a roadmap and alignment. And I saw something that QA alone was never able to do in one day. So I spent the next 10 years learning everything about opportunity framing and stage gate process. So I eventually realized something uncomfortable, that a lot of the challenges that we experience in project execution, they are direct consequences of poor conversations or conversations that maybe are missing right at the start. And especially if you work as a contractor, you are often not exposed to those conversations. But guess what happened? But you are the one that often gets blamed for project failure. And I've seen this pattern across many industries in many locations, not just in Australia, but also in Europe and here in Americas. So that realization, that lack of initial quality conversations at the start that leads to alignment later on, that got me to change my career and move from QA auditing to helping teams at the front end, helping them with the early stage project definition, early stage thinking, and setting up the governance. So here is the question I have for you. Let's bring you into our conversation. Let's focus on your own experiences. Think about that first question. How many of you have delivered a project exactly as planned and still something felt like off? You know, it wasn't right. You did it on time, you're on budget, but somehow it really didn't work. Almost never. Okay, cool. Or maybe Or maybe you are someone that actually inherited a project that was already misaligned. Okay, not your fault, someone else screw up. That happened too. Okay, or maybe how many of you started a project and the solution was already decided? So hear me out. If you answer yes to any of this question, maybe the problem is not the execution, but it's actually your project development, the time you spend to develop and define your project before you jump into execution. And in my word, as someone experiencing decision quality, we call that early stage clarity. Okay, so here's my favorite slide actually, because this visual really represents the heart of what we're talking about today. So if you look at that iceberg and if you look at what happens above the waterline, You hit the typical execution challenges that most projects, no matter what industry, are dealing with. What can we do to prevent delays from happening? What about the rework? How we can respond to the cost escalation? What about the reporting or the QA? And later on, the concerns about return on investment, the reputation, have we actually provided value? And how are we going to maintain what we've actually brought into life? So what happens is what is above the line, that's often where we pay most our attention to. That's where we also assign blame, and that's what we report on, and that's where we demand accountability. You with me? But the real problem is not what is above the waterline, but what is actually below the waterline. These are the conversations that don't actually happen in public, which is what is the business project misalignment. Yeah, Robert says that. I've been part of a project where tech declared success and the business was left asking what? That's right. Yes, those conversations don't really get the attention. The weak risk assessment or the risk assessment is actually doesn't get that gets downgraded. Okay, the unclear, vague success measures. Poor fit problem to solution, and untested assumptions. So look at that iceberg, and I can sort of sense, Robert, you get that sort of frustration. So look at that slide and tell me what's frustrating about this. Type in a chat, what is frustrating about this? What do you think is actually frustrating about this? Okay, so for me, okay, uh, all of the assumptions are underwater. Okay, great. Yes, that's right. And if you look at that longer, you'll see that all of those frustrations, they actually completely fixable issues. They are not technical challenges. They are pretty much questions that if we slow enough, we can have them answered. You with me? But we don't. Because we rush to execution, because progress, because that what it feels really productive. And then when something happens, we say, oh, here are the surprises. And when we are surprised, and then we are surprised when the iceberg sinks the ship. So, look at some of the chat box. This ignores the wisdom of execution's two best friends are simplicity and transparency. This is like complexity and not transparent. That's right. That's right. Uh, so let's look at this slide. So here is the traditional PMI project life cycle. How many of you are using it? And by the way, you can just raise your hand. You're using this every day, raise your hand. So the question is, what is the hidden assumption in this model? What is the hidden assumption in this model? That all the pieces connect perfectly, yeah? Minimal surprises. Yeah, maybe. Stakeholder alignment. I see Terry responding. Yeah, so the hidden assumption, and that might be a surprise, especially if you work in this model, you might not see what's the blind spot. Okay, and I get that. So the hidden assumption, and we're going to talk about it in details, and I'm actually doing it to provoke you first, is that we are solving the right problem with the right solution. So this is the hidden assumption, and this is a big assumption. This assumption, in fact, is enormous. Okay? And if this assumption is wrong, what happens? Everything that follows becomes efficient execution of the wrong thing. Who knows what I'm talking about? Raise your hand. Okay? So let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with this model. Okay? It's strong, it's well structured, it's necessary, but it's built for managing execution because it assumes that you already working on the right problem with the right solution. It assumes clarity already exist. And here is the problem. If clarity is weak at the start, this model doesn't capture this. It actually accelerates this. So if you have a poor alignment at the start, guess what? This model is going to accelerate misalignment. If you have hidden, untested, unnamed, unidentified assumption at the start, this model is going to hide more assumption. And the same applies to optimist bias or risk. And that's when we start to see something interesting. Okay, so great. Um, Another hidden assumption might be trustworthiness, assuming competence, honesty. Yeah. Okay. So bear that in mind. I'm not sure why I have that little hand up. I don't know how to get rid of that hand. Anyway, so here is what's the current data about project. And I know, sorry. Here is the current data about project. And I know a lot of you know about it. And why do I know a lot of you know about the current project statistics? Because those project statistics haven't changed for a very long time. So PMI says, let's say 70% of projects on average do not meet targets when it comes to scope, budget, or value. But what's really interesting, there is also an individual called Professor Bernd Flabjerg who has actually analyzed thousands of projects across the industry. And his data says that it's less than 1% of projects actually meet all the goals. And what's interesting is the data around AI implementation projects. So vast majority of them don't provide measurable business outcomes. That's according to Forbes in August last year. So those numbers, most of those numbers haven't changed in decades. Why is that? Why do you think those numbers haven't changed in decades? Is it because we use the wrong tool? Is it because we haven't found a perfect software? Isn't it because we haven't used our Gantt chart properly? Isn't it because we haven't implemented an AI? I want you to think about it and consider that maybe this is about how we think about the start of the project. And here is even more interesting. Projects, when they fail, they don't fail randomly. They follow particular patterns. And pattern recognition is one of the most underestimated leadership skill. So pattern recognition is one of the most underestimated leadership skill. So what are some of those patterns? When I work with oil and gas mining infrastructure, but I also get to talk to people from IT, and most projects follow those 4 patterns I'm going to talk to you about. And you probably know of them anyway. The first pattern, rushing to execution. We don't have time to think, let's just start. Who knows what I'm talking about? Just raise your hand. Okay. So look, projects don't just move through approvals or through gates, but they move forward very often on partial approvals. And most of the time we think we are saving the time, right? But what happens is we want to show progress and we actually transfer uncertainty and risk into the execution. And hear me out, speed, it's not a problem. But starting execution without fully understanding what you're trying to achieve, without exploring options, without understanding your trade-offs, without understanding your interfaces, that is the problem. Okay? So it looks efficient at the start, but the same thing can cause you rework and then delay as well as frustration later on. Okay? So the second pattern that we see across different projects is the no real alignment. And what I mean by that is everyone is nodding, yes, 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 it's a good idea. But everyone defines success differently. Who has seen this happening? Okay. So look, because agreement is assumed And so what happens is we bring different individuals to the room and we finish those meetings with consensus, but we haven't actually used tools to build shared understanding. And what happens is those disagreements, they don't disappear when we start execution. Those disagreements build resistance. Okay, if we don't bring end users to define the problem and the solution, this is what is going to generate resistance, late delivery, and also loss of confidence in the project delivery. And the issue here, it's not communication. The issue here is lack of process, where you can actually bring a framework to identify outcomes and measures of success from different stakeholders. You with me? The next one is untested assumptions or unidentified assumptions. So here is the thing, assumptions relate to the past. When we try to identify what is broken, they impact what we're focusing on now, so they impact our presence. And they also relate to the future when we build our vision and outcomes. And the problem is not the assumptions themselves. The problem is that we don't identify them, we don't name them, we don't document them, and we don't know what to do with them. Okay? So when someone says, this is a given, I want you to take this as a given. Okay? Maybe it's your CEO, maybe it's your sponsor, maybe it's your executive. Okay? It's our job to ask question. According to whom? Is this a given? Hold on. According to whom? Or how is this a given? Okay, so we tend to trust subject matter experts without actually identifying how is this being a given and spend time to explore, is this a true given? Okay, so we don't write down assumptions, we don't challenge them. And even if you challenge them, we don't know what to do with them, but they still impact our scope, our outcomes, our schedule. And then when they do eventuate, we say, oh, we've got a surprise. Okay, and then another one is underestimating risk. So when we experience challenges, especially in execution phase, it's not like we have a new risk that was unknown. It's because a lot of the risks that were identified earlier were not taken seriously early enough. So how many of you use risk register in your projects? Okay, how many of those risks impact your key decisions? So risk register alone is just a tracking mechanism. It's just about documenting your issues. But you've got to know how to use risk to actually impact your key decision whilst you still have options. So when you start execution, you have no options. You just need to get the job done. You with me? So it's way too late. So you've got to think about how we're going to bring risk early on to actually impact our key decisions. So those four patterns show up again and again in different industries, in different teams, in different geographies. But the question is, what patterns exist in your projects? And the second question is your system set up for projects to succeed or not? Or how do you set up your governance system to interrupt those patterns? Okay? That's where traditional project management life cycle model alone is not enough. Okay? So so we know about those patterns. But here is the thing. They are not caused by incompetence. So where do they come from? Yes, and a lot of them come from our biases. And those biases, what are those biases? So look at the slide. Here are the most common biases that we're dealing with. These are the most common human biases. Okay, it will be fine. This project will be different. The optimist bias. Okay, the confirmation bias, when you only search data that really supports your chosen solution. When you invite to the meeting only people who have the same thoughts and think from the same thinking as you. Okay? Action bias. Let's just move quickly to show progress. Sunk cost fallacy bias. This is the most common bias we see made by local governments. Once they announce project way too early, they commit to solution before they understand what's possible. And they've invested so much that we have to continue. You with me? The authority bias, or one of the most damaging bias when it comes to governance, which is the groupthink. So here is the question. Which bias do you see most in your project meetings? Which bias occurs most of the time in your project meeting? Action bias. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and this is really cool because you can imagine that's exactly what's happening. The higher you get in the hierarchy of organization, the harder it is to say things like, I don't know. Let's ask different stakeholders. So it looks really good and efficient. The sooner we move into progress, the sooner we move into solution and execution, the better it looks. But here is the thing, those bias, it's not a weakness. It's a human thing, and we all experience the bias. It's not like it's something that we can fully eliminate. We can't. But the question is, do you design your early stage conversations, your early stage governance to actually identify the bias and interrupt the bias and challenge the bias, or do you let the bias run the room? You with me? So if I was making all of the decision, would that be a bias? Of course. Yeah. So it's like, how do we actually create the early stage conversations? How do we create the initiation stage? How do we start? How do we bring those different voices to actually minimize the impact of bias and actually identify the different voices and really don't let the loudest voice in making all of those decisions. So here's the next question to bring your own experience. In the chat, finish this sentence. The way we currently run projects is frustrating because. So I'll give you a second to think about it and to get your ideas. The way we currently run projects is frustrating because. Yeah, we underestimate complexity and future hurdles. What else? All of our projects are effectively glorified database queries. Okay, what else? Good. So here is the thing. If you do know me, and I know a lot of you know me through LinkedIn initially, I spent some time on LinkedIn, like many of you, and this is the slide to really show you what a lot of experienced project managers share about the current state of frustration when it comes to project management. There is a large amount of awareness about the challenges and what we talk about today. We measure delivery, not the value. Weak projects don't get killed. Alignment fades after the kickoff. Too many competing priorities. Governance may feel like a theater. AI won't fix broken thinking. So these are the comments that come from project managers, project executives on LinkedIn from different industries, different countries. And this tells me something. This isn't a skill issue that we're dealing with. It's not like we have to focus on knowing more, but it is, or it might be, a thinking issue. So if you want to be seen as a strategic in what you do, If you want to make project management profession strategic, you really need to look more into what are some of those upstream decisions that we need to focus on first. And what do I need to what do I need to get involved in? When can I get involved in this conversation to actually allow me to contribute to more strategic decisions, such as what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the alternatives? How are we going to decide? Who needs to be involved? And so on, so on. So here is the thing. Most strategic decisions, most critical decisions, they're not actually individual decisions. They are group decisions. And when people get together to actually make some big decisions, what happens? They're fairly dysfunctional. They are not on their best behavior. Okay, what do? Okay, they judge, they criticize. And what do I mean by they self-censor themselves? What do you think? What does that mean? They self-censor. So they do run with that mindset, my way or your way. Okay? They self-censor themselves. That means they often don't say what they're thinking for many reasons. It could be a pressure. It could just be a group thing. Okay? It could be the environment in the group. It could be the leaders who are sending messages like, haven't we already covered this point? Or let's keep it simple. You with me? Or hurry up. Or does that actually have anything to do with what we're doing here? Okay? So no one wants to be told, we have already covered this. You with me? Okay, that type of treatment, that type of conversation leave people feeling embarrassed and make them shut down their ideas and don't share. Okay? Has anyone ever seen this before? Anyone ever like experienced that before? So what I'm saying is that conventional meetings, when you're trying to make big decisions, they don't really promote effective group decision making. Okay? So what are we going to do instead? So I recommend you look at the book written by Sam Kainer on Facilitator's Guide to Participation, because Sam Kainer is really expert in collaborative decision making, and he explained that concept really well. So what he really says, if you look at that slide, he talks about, first of all, having that distinction between idealistic and realistic group decision making. So if you look at that slide, what you see people come together to the room to start a new topic. And each bubble represents one idea from one person. And that little arrow, okay, with the line to another bubble, it really shows you how smoothly we move from one idea to the next. Okay, it really shows you that everyone is tracking each other's idea. Everyone is on the same page. Everyone is on board with everything that everyone says. My question to you is this how we make decisions in group? Yes or no? You can just use your head. Is this how we make decisions? So here it is. Most leaders would love that. Okay? And if it doesn't happen, they blame their teams and they say they're dysfunctional. And how do I know that? Because most of them are my clients later on. And they say, I am a manager of a dysfunctional team. So here is the thing. Of course, it's not a realistic model. It's an idealistic model. In that model, there is everything, including groupthink, which is the biggest early stage risk. So when people don't challenge assumptions, there's no debate. That's when we lose the decision quality. So let's look at the next model. So what happens here? What happens here? So here we see real humans. People do go on tangents. They lose track. Okay, they start conversation, then they go off track. They think about something else. They think about what they're going to talk about next. And even if they try really hard, they actually lose the track. Even, and we can't help ourselves, but this is a human thing. However, without a structured facilitation, we converge way too quickly and we still allow the loudest person in the room win every argument. So disagreements are necessary, but they must be structured. So here is the next slide. So Sam Kainer introduced something that we call the diamond model of participation. So especially when it comes to making key decisions in a group environment, when you bring a bunch of people together and they have to express their views, what he says is that we start with divergent thinking. But what's important is, if you look at that model, is to go beyond your familiar opinions, ideas, and solutions. And then later on, move into divergent when we try to prioritize, identify actions, refine, and eventually decide. But if you look at that model, even if you perfectly apply divergent and convergent thinking, what happens in the middle? That's called the messy zone, the grown zone. That's where we experience struggle. That's where we experience conflicts, disagreements, fights. And that's what gets really slow often, confusing, and where a lot of people give up and they say, well, let's stop here and reschedule our meeting for the next week. Who knows what I'm talking about? And that's why we lose the momentum. And that's why so many teams create strategic planning over 6 months. Okay, and they lose already a fundamental condition for group decision making, which is the tension, which is you have to go through the grown zone. Many projects and initiatives got canceled way too early for exactly that reason. It was unbearable to sit with individuals of different opinions and solve that problem. However, I want you to remember that one thing, that grown zone, that conflict is a direct consequence of diversity in the room. You can't change that. In fact, the act of working through the struggle, okay, that's how you build a shared understanding and sustainable solution. More often, if you do it at the start of your project, that's how you build a team that would execute faster than the team that would skip the difficult conversation. You with me? And framing workshop, in the moment we're going to talk about framing workshop, they often feel uncomfortable because there are multiple ground zones that you will have to go through. And that discomfort, that's the cost of your alignment. And it's worth it. I tell you that, it's worth it. But in order for this to work, you've got to have a neutral individual in the room that would serve, that would create the process for the team, that would protect those dissenting voices, that would minimize the groupthink, and would really create the space, not just for safe conversations to happen, but for brave conversations to happen. You with me? We actually don't need safe conversations. We need brave conversations. Okay. And that individual cannot be a project manager. That individual is not a hero, is not someone who provides input to the conversation. We call them framing facilitators. They are the guide, not the hero. And what is important is that you need to create condition for the team to have their best thinking and go through that divergent zone, through ground zone to the convergent zone. You with me? And what interesting is that when you bring diversity, it's not about letting everyone talk about everything. You with me? That's when we lose our time. It's really about unlocking perspective by having a structure in place when you can unlock the real problem, avoid the blind spot, create innovative solutions, and really create that shared understanding and ownership. So in this way, participation is your governance tool. Okay? It's not governance is participation is not just about feeling good. Okay, so think about one project that maybe didn't go very well within the last 6 months. Maybe it didn't fail, but it really didn't go as well as you would have liked it to. And I want you individually to just go over those questions by yourself. You don't have to type anything to the chat. I just want you individually to get present with what happened at the start of the project. Was the problem clearly defined? Did everyone agree on success and on the solution? Were alternatives or different solutions explored? What assumptions were tested? Which ones were untested? Was there a real debate with people who have different views? Were risks identified before the commitment, before moving to execution? And was the first approval truly decision ready? So when we move to execution, was it a real approval? Oh, we just rushed. So think about the project that maybe didn't go as well as you would have liked it to. And using few words, just type in a chat, what was the one thing that maybe was missing or maybe wasn't clearly explored? What was the one thing that could have been done better or maybe was missing altogether? What are some of those? Yeah, maybe there wasn't enough early conversations. That's right. Maybe there wasn't enough courage to identify some of those counterintuitive assumptions. Maybe there wasn't enough governance at the start. Maybe there wasn't enough um, um, alternatives that we could have explored. Maybe there wasn't enough clarity around the problem we're actually trying to solve. And this is why a lot of good teams actually fail, not because they haven't done enough work, but because that early thinking wasn't complete. And once you start execution, everything else gets so expensive. So moving to our main slide, what is the opportunity framing workshop? So it is a structured pattern interruption activity. If you look at that definition, it's a structured early stage conversation that happens and not just at the beginning of a project, but at the time before you are even certain about a problem and a solution. And it is an activity that will help you to navigate through complexity. In fact, the more complex project, the more demand for that conversation. By ensuring that altogether key individuals from across the business would identify the real problem, we use different perspective, we use the right people in the room and the right tools. So ultimately, you're trying to shape that opportunity state. So once you have the scope defined, that's when you have a project. But before you have a scope, we call it an opportunity. Okay. So that's when you shape your opportunity and you create a value proposition. What is a value proposition? Value proposition, it's a clearly identified objective, which is what is it that we're actually trying to achieve with the reason why. Where is the value actually coming from? Okay. And determine the best way to pursue it. So what is the project roadmap to let us know when do we need to start execution? What do we need to hand over to the client? Okay. And therefore, what do we need to make a decision on our solution? You with me? So you do it way before you even know what the solution is. And it is expressed as a workshop where you bring different individuals from different parts of the business. And the process takes between 1 and 3 days. And it's very engaging, it's very interactive, and it allows people often to meet for the very first time and hear what are some of the priorities from your client. Okay, what is going on right now with engineering team? So you get to build those relationships and you get to go through a structured conversation to arrive with clarity, alignment, and roadmap. So clarity and alignment are the outcomes, and framing it's the tool. And just conscious about the time. And we really use it for capital projects, oil and gas, mining, pharma, infrastructure, transportation. We have been using it recently more and more for AI implementation, as well as company-wide initiatives, as well as any regulatory or compliance time projects. Wherever the solution isn't clear, there are many stakeholders to satisfy, and it really seems quite complex. Involves cross-functional teams. That's really when you use it. So the key questions your framing should be able to answer is: what problem are we solving and why? Which one is important? What problem are we solving, and therefore what is the opportunity? Okay, what does success look like right at the end for different stakeholders? What are the outcomes? What are the measures of success? If you think about the solution, what must be true for the solution to make that project successful? What do we know already? What are the real givens? What are the real organizational boundaries or directives we must operate within? And by the way, which one we can challenge? Okay. Including what is in the scope, what is outside of the scope, and what is it that we don't know. That's where you begin to see your assumptions. Most assumptions are hidden. So you need tools that will help you to uncover assumptions. Again, why does this matter? Where is the value? What are the key value drivers? By the way, what is the number one value driver? Okay, we don't want to have 10 reasons why we're doing it. And then we build options and identify decisions that are required to move through. So it's a decision driven roadmap that it's your ultimate outcome. So here is a framework which I have developed for my clients as an easy way to teach them what it takes to prepare, and then what it takes to facilitate, and then what they're going to get at the end. So PATH is the acronym that stands for Prepare, Analyze, Target, and Handle. And it's mainly used for projects from $1 million up. And it is really built towards understanding decisions as opposed to deliverables. Deliverables come later on. So you take time to assemble the right stakeholders, collect the right data, and build a presentation to brief everyone into, why are we even here? Then you plan for the workshop. And only then you look at analyze, target, and handle. So this simple process will help teams to understand a project context before jumping into options, roadmap, and action plan. You with me? So it's all about knowing what's the sequence of conversations that we need to have, as opposed to letting sponsors saying, this is the solution. So we identify issues, we create value propositions. So the first stage, analyze, that's where we understand the context. And we organize the context, we create the value proposition for the project, and we build the project boundaries. Only then we define success measures, and we look at knowing what's the next milestone, what are the key decisions, and then we build options. Sometimes options are clear. Is it, if we're building a family home in Florida, is it a 2-story or 3-story? Where we have a garden or not? What about swimming pool? Yada, yada. Sometimes you have to build those options. Okay. And then you develop roadmap, map your stakeholders and plan actions. And only then you use individuals from across the business to identify your minimum amount of deliverables that you need that would support decisions that you need to answer and help you to move to the next gate. And only then you plan for your assurance reviews. You with me? So the only reason deliverables exist is to support decisions that you need to make. So what happens when misalignment is missing? You might be familiar if you are from Corpus Christi. That's the first city we lived in when we moved to the US. And last year we found out about this project that got canceled. And it's when the local government invested $50 million in developing a new desalination facility, which was to help the growing demand for the industrial water use. So they had a problem with water. It's an area where there's a lot of demand from the industry for water, and the government decided to build a new desalination facility. So that's what they started. They said that's what we need, and this is why. They canceled the project after spending $50 million when they realized the cost moved from 140 million initially to 1.5 billion, and they haven't even gone to the planning stage. So right now they are working on a new concept. So the core issue wasn't engineering, but it was misalignment. It was misalignment on the solution right from the start and not understanding assumptions about the project. They were never identified, they were never named, they were never tested. The project got recycled. So the key I want you to be paying attention to is the language the client, the owner of the project brings, or maybe your project sponsor, or maybe your executive, maybe even your CEO. Okay, we need to build X to solve Y. How many of you had that before? Raise your hand up. We need to get that project done in 12 months. Okay, as opposed to what is the opportunity and why it matters. What do we know, what we don't know? Here are the key issues. What does success really mean? What are the options? What is the high level roadmap? So that you make justifiable decisions as opposed to let other people, I let the buyers make decision. Okay. So you can see you really create a story that then you can tell anyone what is it that you are working on and why. So I've got one of my last slides before we take a moment for questions, which is this. So you framed your opportunity. The question is, how do you manage from the opportunity framing? How do you go into the delivery of your project? So how many of you are familiar with stage gate process? Raise your hand. How many of you are familiar with stage gate process? So here it is. So stage gate process was founded by Dr. Robert Cooper, who later set up a fantastic company called the Stage Gate International. What I use is decision gate process, which specifically is used with clients in my resource industry. So what it really is the project governance tool that allows you to take any project, no matter what industry, and break it down into stages and gates. So you do the work during the stage, and during the gate, you decide if you are ready to move forward or not, and if you actually still want to move forward or not. So what actually happens is in the assess phase, that's when we are dealing with an opportunity. We don't have a scope yet. We have an opportunity. That's where we're trying to understand what is the problem we're solving. What is the potential on investment? What is the value proposition? And if we have the answer to that, we move into the concept stage when we're looking at whole range of options. And we finally align on one option that is fit for purpose. And when we move into the develop phase, that's when we build the requirements for our options. That's when we organize the permits, we confirm the funding. With that in your project, a PMI talk, develop phase, that's your planning stage. That's when you get ready for execution. If you move to execution, that's when you make it happen. You implement, you execute, you procure, you construct. And finally, you asking yourself question at the gate, are we ready to implement, to move to a new environment? And that's when you're moving to the operate phase, when you measure and ask questions, did we actually deliver expected value? And what happens at each gate? At each gate, different individuals from outside of the project collect evidence to verify that your stage is complete, is ready. That's when you look at risk and you look at how can we mitigate them. And that's when you understand what resources I need for the next stage. And only then your funding is released. You with me? So a lot of our clients follow PMI life cycle, and you can sort of imagine that the first two stages, they sort of like the work that needs to be done during the project initiation. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that project life cycle according to PMI. They are the process steps that need to occur in every stage. So every stage we need to initiate, plan, manage, control, measure, close in order to move to the gate and then the next stage. So here is the thing. How many of your projects today have clear decision points when you can change your mind and pivot? How many of your projects have decision gates in place? And the second question is, which stage do you think most of your projects spend too little time in? Concept, okay? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Looking at other options, yeah. Going above what's familiar, what's tested, and going above what we've done before. Okay, great. But here is the catch I want you to get with decision gate process. There's a lot of clients we work with, and we talked about decision gate process. And here is the catch. A gate, so what happens during that blue diamond, a gate can only test based on what the team framed. So your opportunity framing, you're doing during the assess phase and usually at the start of the concept phase. Then you lock your frame. You don't do any more framing. You don't want to deal with any framing. Then you're just doing your kickoff workshop and you're putting a hat of the project manager just to get the work done, especially from the develop phase, execute phase. But in our world of decision quality, what we tend to say, the first two or three phases, especially the first two phases, that's when you create the value of the project. That's where your thinking is, that's where you want to, we don't even have in oil and gas project managers leading those two phases. We call them development manager because this is where the creativity takes place. This is where you don't want someone who shut down the ideas too quickly just to get the job done. So the real project manager comes in develop phase when you confirm the scope and you don't want framing, brainstorming, creativity. You just want to get the job done. You with me? So there is a time when you can influence because it's cheap, because you can. And that's where the opportunity exists. That's where you will create value. And then there is a time when you need to maintain that value just by getting the job done. Okay? But here is the catch. Your gate can only do a good job based on how well you frame at the start. If your framing is weak, you're going to approve during the gate an uncertainty. So you've got to have the frame. So without that frame, that's where we see governance becomes compliance. That's the biggest problem with governance. They have no space for creativity. And the other way around, if you're very creative, I've worked with a lot of facilitators, but they have no knowledge about decision gate process, then that big brainstorm, that big kickoff way too early, makes workshop a theater where nothing gets done because there is no structure. So you really need both. And my one of the last slide. So the one thing I want to really leave you with is that if you want different outcomes, you must identify and interrupt your patterns. Then find a way to frame your projects or opportunities, and then use decision gate as a project roadmap. Okay, so the best project managers are not those that go through execution the fastest, but they are the ones who decide better. And again, it's not about adding more. It's actually about making decisions that you're already making anyway, but making them with more consciousness and intention. Um, okay, so if that's something that interests you, I do invite you to follow me on LinkedIn. My intention is to share that information with as many people as possible, really influence how we start projects. And if you go to my website, www.wilson.bsc/stagegate process, you will have access at no cost to our decision readiness assessment checklist. So check it out. See if that's something useful for you. It really no matter whether you're using Waterfall, StageGate, Decision Gate process, Agile, no matter what you use, check this out. Use it. It's a 90 seconds checklist you can use on your project and see how much they're ready before they move to execution. And obviously, something really close to my heart. Today, we have launched our book where a lot of this information covered in this webinar are included. And for the next day, the next 2 days, we have special price for the Kindle version, which is less than $1. So if that's something that interests you, check this out. And yeah, and I'm waiting for any questions.
First off, I wanted to say that this was amazing, Iwona. This was a really amazing information. A lot of it sounds like common sense, but then when we look over our experiences, we realize that maybe this common sense isn't quite so common in our projects. So having that reminder is very valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, Tanya, I used to say that it's one of the most uncommon common sense approach.
Right.
Yeah,
I
thank you
want to
so
get
much, Tanya. Thank you for this opportunity. Always happy to share and connect. Feel free to send me questions and just really let me know if there is a way I can serve your community and all of you attending this webinar in any way possible. Thank you.
you. And I wanted to wrap up saying thank you on behalf of Project Success Academy too. So all of y'all that have joined, once the Zoom meeting processes, you will receive a copy of that later today. And those of you that have entered your PMI ID number into our system, I'll be reporting the PDUs on your behalf today too. So that always makes maintaining the cycles much easier. So appreciate y'all's time. And if you have any questions, like I said, I think y'all all have both mine and Iwana's information, and you'll be getting an email later. So,
Okay,
all
beautiful.
right. Thank y'all so much.
Have a great day, guys. Bye bye.